Minister, I'd like to congratulate you too on your recent elevation, and I wish you the best of luck in the position. Yeah, happy to just speak on not alone affordable housing, but housing in general. And I think what we have right across the board is an affordability issue. And there's no doubt we've entered into a very different period in the last 5-7 years, but particularly post-COVID, in terms of the economic environment, the regulatory environment, and the whole issue of sustainability and affordability. But it has to be said, Minister, a large amount of the difficulties that we have, not all, but a large, are being driven by government policy. And the first one that you could look to, which is largely dysfunctional at this stage, particularly in terms of private housing, is our planning. And the planning guidelines that are being observed and that are soon to be made mandatory, which are talking about density guidelines for many parts of our urban areas and even some of our less urban areas of 50 units to the hectare, Minister, is totally, it's not marketable, it's not bankable, it's not buildable. And yet we continue to go look at this. In my own area of Waterford, we're now trying to, in Waterford City, which is not a densely populated area, the environs, we're now looking at 50 units to the hectare. And that means for every developer, he has to come along and look at putting in apartment blocks. And Minister, firstly, people in Waterford don't want to live in apartments. There is room there to build houses, and they were all born in houses, small 2- and 3-bed houses. That's what they would like. They don't want apartment blocks. Secondly, the costs of financing an apartment complex as opposed to financing a house is completely different. You have to get all of the certification, all of the stairwells done. Every single apartment has to be finished before you can sign it off and give it over. And that's putting huge strain. So the result of that is in these high density developments, builders are looking and they're deciding to leave it. And so we have zone lands down there. We have a number of strategic housing developments still approved, nothing started there, Minister, and that's part of the problem. We also have a significant issue with planning appeals, planning observations. I was with a private developer recently who has 3 separate sites in around the southeast, and all of them are held up with planning observations. On an average, he's just showing it is now taking 5 years from the acquisition of land to actually turning around to sell the houses on site. And that is not something that's marketable either. And I would say to you also, Minister, I was in Limerick recently and I met a large development company down there, and their biggest problem is finance. And they could actually double, within 12 months they could double their output, but they cannot get lines of finance to support their business. We have basically 2 banks who are lending to the build sector if you come along with 30, 40, 50% of the equity to try and drive it. And we need a proper functioning finance agency to support housing, Minister, to support private housing, because private housing is delivering the most Part 5s in this country outside of other local authority schemes. And I'd also ask the Minister to have a look again at Irish Water and ESB and all of the certifications that are now required before you can hand over a house. It is the bureaucracy now in building a house is nuts, whether you're a private developer or whether you're the local authority. But certainly private developers are at this stage getting quite frustrated. A lot of those that are long time in the business are just scaling back, and they're just basically building a smaller boat because it's just too difficult and they're getting fed up with it. And Minister, I would say to you, the LDA and HFA, I was with a developer recently who took housing finance because he wanted to get on, because he thought it would help him get on a tenders list for local authority housing. And by the time they were finished with conveying and all the rest of it, it took them twice as long to finish out on the site, to go back every time and get approval for the next stage and the next drawdown. So these things are not working, and they've been said many, many times in this House at this stage, Minister. You need to look back at the policy. It's not rocket science. We could build during the Celtic Tiger 100,000 houses a year, and I take it that we did build badly in some instances, but we built a lot of very worthwhile housing development. It can be done, the industry can do it, but Minister, the policy is not helping, and I would ask you to look in specifically at the planning policy. That is a huge block to delivering the housing targets that we need to go on.